In Lingua Fracta, Colin Brooke re-envisions the rhetorical canon of invention as proeresis. Significantly, as proeresis, invention is not merely a means to an end, a finite process, or a solitary pursuit of a completed product. The third chapter begins with an epigraph from Jean-François Lyotard that explains, quote, I think every writer carries in him or herself as a particular temptation the weakness or the possibility of ignoring that he or she is committed to a je ne sais quoi. The evidence that we have to take on the burden of the linkages between thoughts or phrases does not mean that we ever master them, end quote. Brooke advocates for such a commitment to je ne sais quoi, or what cannot be explained and what can be left unknown. Similarly, he compels rhetoric and composition and new media scholars to shift towards an understanding of invention that resists closure. But the question remains, what does it mean for invention to close? Invention commonly involves generating ideas in order to begin, revise, or complete a project. When I think of invention, I remember creating webs of ideas in elementary school when selecting a topic for a writing assignment. I was taught to narrow down my topic by crossing out all of the ideas one at a time until I was left with the one that I would pursue. In this act, I was learning invention by elimination. I was brainstorming by selecting. To me, this experience recalls Kenneth Burke's famous observation, a, quote, way of seeing is a way of not seeing, end quote. In the context of the writing process, this might mean that invention opens a range of possible avenues for exploration, which the act of writing destroys when a writer chooses one topic, one thesis, or one avenue. Viewing invention in this way means that the end of its process marks an act of violence, a moment of choice that disposes of other available options. In contrast to this potentially reductive view of invention, Brooke suggests that proeretic invention can involve, quote, a focus on the generation of possibilities, rather than the elimination until all but one are gone and closure is achieved. Closure is no less important now than it has ever been, but with the advent of new media and interfaces that resist closure, proeresis provides an important corrective to the hermeneutically oriented, inventional theory that has prevailed in our field to date, end quote. Brooke acknowledges that closure is still important. There are still papers to be submitted, deadlines to be met, and questions that demand tentative answers. To meet various demands, the illumination of one particular avenue or idea at the expense of the others might be unavoidable. But throughout the invention process, we might continue to reinvent our understanding of this avenue in relation to other possibilities. We might somehow allow these other possibilities to haunt our work in its iterations. Our closure might always be fragile rather than certain. Thinking of invention in this way reminds me of one of my favorite artists, Dale Chihuly, and his work with glass and light in particular. In St. Petersburg, Florida, near my hometown of Tampa, Chihuly's museum stands as a fortress of fragility. He explains, quote, people for centuries have been fascinated with glass, colored or crystal. It transmits light in a special way, and at any moment it might break. It's magic, end quote. He adds, quote, there's something about its fragility that intrigues you. You move it the wrong way, and it's all over, end quote. Because of the fragility of his exhibits, in fact, I was only allowed to take pictures of these smaller pieces when I visited the museum. Even though I was able to photograph these pieces, I was frustrated by the way the camera captured only one simple view of the glass. It is impossible to represent in a still image the movement and constant flux of these pieces when they interact with light. The light that interacts with the glass blower's work, the glass as it takes shape, and the viewer's perspective also critically inspires Chihuly's art. As light hits the glass takes on a life of its own. This means that creators and viewers can see the same piece of glass take many different shapes and forms, and this process is ongoing. To see the art is to re-experience and reinvent it. Speaking of the integral role that light plays in his process, Chihuly writes, quote, when you're working with transparent materials, when you're looking at glass, plastic, ice, or water, you're looking at light itself. The light is coming through and you see that cobalt blue, that ruby red, whatever the color might be. You're looking at the light and the color mixed together, end quote. This mixing and the collaboration that involves the invention and reinvention of Chihuly's art resonates with Brooks' concept of proeresis. More specifically, the constant interplay between light and glass, I think, serves as a metaphor for the process of invention in writing as imagined by Brooke. In part, this insistence on invention as influx and ongoing reflects an overarching element of Brooks' project. He argues that, quote, "Our aims as rhetorical scholars must evolve. No single model is likely to prove capable of returning the sorts of stability that are implied, if imperfectly accomplished, by communication triangles or rhetorical situations, and thus we need to begin thinking about goals other than stability," end quote. While I'm not sure what Brooks' alternative goal for rhetoric or writing might be, I wonder if one starting point that new media suggests is fragility. Like glass, maybe we can come to see rhetoric as a vibrant, constantly changing, stumbling process that might break at any moment.